I didn't really know what I was doing, I think. I was the first person in my family to go to university. I did degrees in economics and law, a combined program, because I thought I'd be good at it. I was reasonably good at it, but I'm not sure if the right thing to do is to do what you're good at. It's probably better to do what you're madly in love with, if you can work that out. I worked for a big Australian firm for 3 years, and I thought that was reasonably boring. I mean, the first 2 years were okay, but then it started to get boring as it got repetitive. So then there was an opportunity to work in Hong Kong, so then I worked in Hong Kong. By then I was absolutely certain that practicing law was not that exciting, but I didn't know what else to do. So I got a job in New York, and New York was at least a fascinating place to live. And that was a lot of fun. Manhattan in the 1980s was a lot of fun, but the work was, ultimately, I suppose, the work was interesting, but it just didn't seem meaningful to me. My problem was a meaning problem, really. There wasn't really any dabbling. I was just like, I got to the point where I couldn't see continuing as a practicing lawyer, and I didn't know what else to do. And I thought I'd just give it a shot. So I went off and joined a law faculty, started to teach, and it was just much more me. It took me about another 15 or 16 years to find UNSW. So I joined UNSW 11 years ago. Early on, I was doing sort of global financial regulation, global systemic financial regulation. More recently, I've got swept up in technology and data and, the digital transformation, and that's been fascinating. But the most fun has been the last 3 years on fintech, regtech, blockchain, and just having this sort of international impact. I've worked with a guy in Hong Kong called Doug Arner for a long time, an American who teaches there, and we did all our earlier stuff together on global financial regulation. He started to get involved in technology, and he invited me on to a paper. And again, it was purely fortuitous. I didn't really have very much background, but he wanted me on the paper, so I got involved, and then it took off from there. I didn't even think 5 years ago I'd had some impact in my career, but it never would have occurred to me that, we only published that 3 years ago, and the pace of change is so fast, it's now just showing up in all of the articles being written about the area. Our real area is, how do you regulate the impact of technology on finance? And so that includes blockchain and the algorithmic interpretation of data and all that sort of stuff. So for instance, late last year, the New York Fed contacted us and wanted to talk to us and said they'd invite a couple of other regulators onto this call. By the time we had 20 central banks on the line, I was fully awake. And I've never had anything like that in my career before, but it's just the combination of an international team that can do a lot of presentations of our ideas, coupled to a topic that the regulators of the world are really struggling with. We've done a lot of work on the regulatory side of it. How do central banks get their settings better? I was working with the governors of the 6 Pacific Island nation central banks, and these were the sorts of things we were discussing. How do you use technology to help people become financially included, get access to financial services? So the last 3 or 4 years, I've moved off in a completely new direction, which has been wonderful. Don't do it because your parents think it's a good idea. We have too many lawyers in Australia. We have too many law schools. It's a good degree. It trains your mind to think in a certain way. We need a lot of students doing combined computer science law degrees or advanced or maths and law. The crunching of data basically comes down to high-level maths skills. We're not going to have nearly enough of them. It's data, it's the rise of algorithmic interpretation of data. It's going to change financial services profoundly. It's going to change the practice of law profoundly. And it'll have a direct impact on law, the practice of law. It is already starting to, but it'll have a major impact on law, but it'll have an even much bigger impact on the banks and how the whole financial sector works. But we need lawyers with a really good understanding of technology. And we are going to, if you don't want to study law and you can do maths, for God's sake, study maths. We're going to need so many more maths graduates. The people who absolutely should do it are people like my wife, who just love legal analysis, who love practicing law, who would do it whether they get paid or not. The busier she is, the happier she is. But in my experience, that's a very small proportion of the total number of lawyers out there. So if you're confident you really want to be a lawyer, that's a great reason to do it. If you want to do it as a general education, it's a pretty good one, but there's a lot of other really good general educations. You can do a couple of master's degrees in the time you can do a JD. So think about it, is what I would say. Don't do it as an automatic reaction to social expectations or whatever. I would have come to UNSW earlier. I had the opportunity to come about 5 years before I did, and I should have. That was probably a mistake. But overall, it's all worked out well. This is a special law school. Because it began life as a social justice law school, it has a much broader conception of its mandate and its purpose than most Australian law schools. I'm not reading cases, I'm not parsing statutes, I'm not doing the traditional stuff, but what I am doing has a huge policy relevance. So this is a very happy place to do it for me. And it's also one of the most collegial faculties in the country, without question, and that's really important. Anything that involves the impact of technology on society, on the law, on finance is the sort of big hot topic. Because everybody knows, I think, we're at a sort of tipping point. If you can imagine, if you have a Woolworths frequent shopper card, imagine how much they know about you. They've got so much data about you. They can predict all sorts of things by running correlations over that. And they know what you eat, they know what your weekly grocery spend is, they know, probably because they own a liquor store, they probably know what alcohol you drink, they can predict very accurately your life expectancy, your health status, they can tailor health insurance for you, all sorts of things. None of that is really being done yet. We're just at the edge, but in the next period, and I'm not sure how long it'll take, we really are at a tipping point where, the big corporations will know so much about us, and the legal system's response to that is a century out of date. The idea is you want to use this app, you consent to the privacy policy, and legally that means they can do anything that they write into that policy. You never read the policy, nobody ever reads the policies. That's a broken model. So the law has to come up with a new way of responding to that, and we're not even at square one for that response. Some very traditional scholars have had extraordinary impacts. I'm a big fan of, say, Sir Roy Good's work at Oxford, and Roy can show, he's an old man now, but you read Roy's analysis of some commercial law concepts, and it's like turning a spotlight on in a dark room. Stuff you've never fully understood before is all of a sudden so really clear. My field, in a sense, is very easy, because a lot of what we look at, we look at for the first time. I mean, we had a 18,000 word paper on RegTech on SSRN within 9 months of the term being coined, right? So, we came up with the word TechFin to describe data companies moving into financial services about 8 months before Jack Ma did, who's the founder of Alibaba. So, funnily enough, his coining of the term gets a lot more citations than ours does, but we were first. It's quite easy to have a lot of impact if you're the first to write about something. It's very challenging if you're the 500th. Justin Trudeau said at the World Economic Forum in Davos this year, he said, "The pace of change has never been so fast, and it'll never be so slow again." And that really sums it up, right? I mean, the iPhone was only introduced in 2007, I think. And think how our whole lives revolve around smartphones now, right? So the change in the next 10 years is going to be much more than the change in the past 10 years. And the legal system is profoundly ill-equipped, profoundly unready to deal with it, but it's going to have to. Well, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I wouldn't have had a clue that I was going to become a technology lawyer, and these days I'm virtually entirely a technology lawyer, so I don't know where I'll be in 5 years' time, but I'd be surprised if it wasn't a lot more in the same direction of the last few years, which is the impact of technology on society, how the law responds to that, all of the multiple challenges that come with that. I mean, I think the Equifax hack in the US last year, where basically the personal, financial and other information of the majority of American adults was released onto the web. The Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal. I mean, the law doesn't even know how to begin or respond to these sort of major challenges that come along with the algorithmic interpretation of data. But the good news is most people in decision-making roles, I think, understand this is important now. They understand we're on the edge of a massive change, And so it's a really exciting time to be working in this space. So I suspect I'll just continue, as long as Douglas and Dirk will continue to have me, I'll continue working in the team.